Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Dennis Bragg. It's Wednesdays with the mayor. We're here in the Missoula Public Library on kind of a stormy evening with Mayor Jordan Hess. I was laughing. I was talking about didn't have to avoid too many people in the bike lanes on the way in tonight. It was like they'll get out there, but that first storm, everybody's sort of tentative as we get going. So we wanted to sit down tonight and kind of look back at some of the successes, the accomplishments, especially some of the things that you see that are still on Missoula's agenda, things that we have to deal with and those things. And just kind of a little bit of a discussion about, kind of what's next for the city, maybe what's next for you, some election, voters have spoken, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I did want to talk a little bit about that just for a second to give you a chance to thank folks. This has been, it's challenging to come in and, follow up a man like John Engen. It's kind of like if it was you two and Bono stepped aside. Now you got to all of a sudden come in and front the band, right? What about the challenges and those things, and how much was that support important to you personally and professionally?
Well, I'm glad I didn't have to front the band because I can't sing. but I just can't say enough about how grateful I am for all the support that I had from city staff who were with me every step of the way, from friends and colleagues on the Missoula City Council who supported me and had my back, and from people in the community who voted for me, who gave me their time and their money and their volunteer efforts, their friendship, their good counsel, their wise humor, and all of those things. Being a candidate is difficult, and all of those things that help you not only get out there and get the word out and get votes, but help you stay sane and happy and somewhat grounded. It was a real experience, and I learned a ton, and I had a great time, and I learned so much about Missoula, about our community, and that's something that I'm incredibly grateful for.
I always appreciated your enthusiasm, and I think you filled an interesting niche this last year plus, because you had a chance to come in with that long council experience, being the veteran on the council, but then also being able to turn around and have that kind of continuity, if you will. Did that help out to be able to come into this very challenging position, having had that experience on the council?
Yeah, I was joking with someone today that I still don't know what I'm doing, and I really wouldn't have known what I was doing if I had come into this without that council experience. Just that long-term, the city is a really interesting organism and organization, and cities in general are really interesting in terms of how they can approach problems. Cities are pretty nimble. You can adapt pretty quickly. You can adjust to things. You can solve or mitigate problems at the local level that might take years or decades, or just be put off indefinitely at the state and federal level. And you also have a really interesting set of constraints. So there's things that by federal law you cannot do. There's things that by state law you must do or cannot do. And you're really left to kind of pick up the pieces. As state and federal governments have abdicated responsibility on really important priorities, you're really left to pick up the pieces as to how you can chart a path forward in an increasingly complicated, complex world.
I think that's interesting too with Missoula in particular. I look at the form of government we have, but also this amazing challenge that we are a regional center by Montana standards, and yet by larger standards, we're still a fairly rural, small city.
Yeah.
And so you're sort of in this. You got to figure these things out, but do it with this amount of resource, and that takes a team, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And we have a top-notch team, and that has been the thing that has been the best about all of this. It's just fun to get up and go to work every day, and that's the because there's people who really do care enough to they wake up and they say, how can I make Missoula a better place today? And that is sounds cheesy, but that is that is the ethos of most of the city staff that you work with, is just how can I help, how can I make our community better, and that's really that's the part that's so rewarding.
That's great. You have a quote here. I love this. I'm going to quote this, and we'll talk a little bit about this. It's been said that people overestimate what they can accomplish in a year and underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years.
Yeah, and I don't know who that's attributable to, and so I have to put a disclaimer out there that I can't take credit for it. It was an old technology, kind of information technology or information systems quotation from decades ago.
Yeah. How do you feel about that? That is an interesting way to approach a timeline that
Yeah.
can be quite dynamic, especially when you're in an elected position.
Well, I've been looking back and thinking about the last 10 years a lot, and I remember a council colleague a couple years after we acquired the water system. One of the people who was on the council at that time from the very beginning leaned over to me at an event and said, "Did you ever think that you may have at that moment done the most important thing you'll ever do in your life professionally in acquiring the water system?" And I really didn't. And in retrospect, that that is probably the most important thing that the city of Missoula, under John Engen's leadership, has been able to do for our community. And that's something that that's something that's important today. We're operating at rates that are still lower than the 2011 water rates. We are plowing millions of dollars into capital improvements and reducing leakage rates and improving that system day in and day out. We have employees that we've retained that are happy, that have taken, have good municipal jobs. And all of those are important today. But when you look out, at the uncertainty of our climate and weather patterns, when you look out 10, 50, 200 years, that water system under municipal ownership is going to be incredibly important. And not having the pressures of bottling our water for external consumption in times of drought and water strife, that's just such an important item. So that's one example of all of these things that happen seemingly slowly when you look at it on a yearly timeline, but just a deluge of things happening over the last decade.
When you look at a decade, it's a much different slice, but what you do in that year can have ripple effects for multiple decades.
Yeah.
I was impressed too with Mountain Water. We talked about this a few months back, but the accelerated pace of the upgrades, you certainly have to look at that. I remember setting through all the trials and thinking, okay, this is a long-term play here, and it is, but I did not expect the amount of aggressive upgrades and stuff, and that must be satisfying to look, having been here for the legal challenge and going through that fight, to now look back and look at this system and realize where we're at.
Yeah, so we're closing in on 6.5 years of municipal ownership. And during that time, our leakage rate continued to accelerate because we'd patch leaks and new ones would spring up over here. And we have water mains that we still have water mains from the early 1900s. I mean, we still are replacing water mains from 1904, and actually those aren't even the ones that are the most problematic. There's some right around both the world wars where they had interesting materials that were war surplus, calamine pipes or different thin-walled pipes that are prone to leakage, and we're replacing those on an ongoing basis. And that is, so anyway, in 6.5 years, we just reached a few months ago the point where we have replaced enough linear feet of water mains and replaced enough leaks or repaired enough, eliminated enough leaks that we have outpaced the rate of new leakage. So that just goes to show you what disrepair the system was in and how much neglect it had taken from the prior owner, and but also the necessity for the rapid investment.
Yeah, was that an impressive thing? One other thing that I like, another one that you have kind of used, is the magnetic allure of our community is threatening our future. And we've talked some about that, but let's talk a little bit more about what that's meant to you. You come into a period of time on council and then this transition when Missoula is a much different place than when you took council.
Yeah.
I mean, not radically different, but you look at the traffic volumes, you look at the people moving in, you look at the cost of housing, you look at the kind of rebooting and regrowth over at UM. I mean, there's been a lot that's happened in this period of time. Are we getting to a point where that is still, do you see a challenge, this magnetic allure, and how do we face that we're already living in?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a wonderful community. I remember as a kid coming to Missoula, and it didn't smell that great, and there was not a lot going on downtown, and the river was not all that clean, and the air quality was nothing to be desired. And we have, over the last number of decades, we have invested in community. We have invested in people and in place, and that has had the effect of elevating our community and creating this really desirable community. I think we've invested in civic and cultural and recreational infrastructure in a way that has really promoted a quality of life and provided a quality of life for residents of our community. And it has also made us a really desirable place. You know, if you're a remote worker and you want to find a place to land that has good schools and good trail system and world-class recreation and
I always say recreation out the door.
yeah,
You
you
know?
know, and as Commissioner Slotnick always says, it's coffee, pastry, and beer. I mean, you've got fantastic coffee shops, fantastic restaurants, good local breweries, good, you know, this great supportive community of small businesses. So people move here for coffee, pastry, beer. They move here for parks and trails and open space and opportunities to access the outdoors. And that magnetic allure of the community is truly what I think gives us this great risk moving forward. I was at a conference last week in Washington, D.C., and I had my little name badge that Missoula, Montana, and I met mayors from Sarajevo and Reykjavik and Melbourne, Australia, and towns across Scranton, Pennsylvania, towns across the U.S. And every single person I met had some registration of Missoula.
Wow.
You know, they knew us, they knew something about us. Maybe they watch Yellowstone.
Yeah.
Maybe they have been here, got married here, or just wanted to come here. And that's something that is really pretty remarkable. It's also something that that we need to work actively to protect and preserve the character of our community and make sure that our commitment to community and our commitment to one another remains as strong as ever and actually strengthens as we have all of these forces of change in our community.
Because all you have to do, I mean, there are communities all over the West that were in that, I think particularly a lot of places in Colorado or Arizona, even in Utah, where they reach a certain point where, there is that magnetic allure, like you say, and it happens so fast. All of a sudden, people who have been there for years look around and say to themselves, oh, now we have a traffic problem, or now we have this infrastructure problem, or now our taxes have gone up. That transition can happen quite quickly, can't it?
Yeah, and I think that that's manifesting itself in positive ways in Missoula in terms of community attitude. So I think we've been doing really innovative engagement on our code reform project, and we're reforming our land use code really from soup to nuts, and that's doesn't sound very sexy on its face, but it is what really governs the built form of our community. How tall can your fence be? How far are you set back from the alley? How tall can your roof line be? And it's how we relate to one another in the built environment. That also has a lot to do with how affordable is housing, how walkable is a neighborhood. Can I buy groceries within a reasonable walk or commute from my neighborhood or from my house? Can I get a cup of coffee down the street? So the zoning code and the development code really has a lot to do with just how we live our everyday lives. And what I think is really interesting is that people are realizing, I really like my single family neighborhood. However, I also really want my kids and grandkids to be able to afford to live here. And so there's these trade-offs of, and they're not, I don't even think trade-offs is the right word. There's some
It's
evaluations.
almost a hybridization.
Yeah, and there's some evaluation or confirmation of our values. We want to be a community where Missoulians can afford to live here, to buy a house here. Someone who wants to go to school here can afford to go to school here, or someone who lived here their whole life can afford to retire here and remain here. And so those are values that we hold really dear, and those shape the way we need to approach housing and land use.
It takes that community definition too, doesn't it? I mean, that really is, and that's an ongoing process. It's not something that you finish, put it in a book, and it's on a shelf, and nobody ever goes back to it. If you're going to be a dynamic community, you have to be dynamic in your thinking, don't
Absolutely,
you?
yeah.
And your participation in planning and discussions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating you bring this up that, something changed with Missoula in recent years. But I think it started much earlier than that, because even in the 90s, you bring up, I remember as a kid, we'd be going through to see the relatives over in the Gallatin. And you'd go through, and I can remember as a little kid, it was like you'd drive through here in the winter, and it was just, you think Tacoma had pulp mill smell, right? Missoula on a foggy day in the middle of January was, not good. But then that changed, and you think of all those articles with Outside Magazine in the 90s. We were always on those lists and, those kind of things. So it's fascinating to see, and people can research so much more now, can't they? They, if they want a walkable neighborhood, they can just Google it out and figure out what do we really have? So if we're going to compete, we have to be able to do that too, right?
And so I think one of the things around that we have to do as well is that, I live over on the west side, which, historic working class neighborhood and compact, walkable, traditional neighborhood design. And that neighborhood is really designed. It's also where we have some of our lowest income students at Lowell School. It's also where we have some of our most homeless students in the MCPS system at Lowell School. So it's a disadvantaged neighborhood and a working class neighborhood. It is also subject to gentrification because of those desirable attributes. So you can look at the walk score of your home, and suddenly this is a desirable trait and an amenity, and someone who can afford to price someone out, might come into the neighborhood. And so I think the challenge is to continue to be a welcoming community, to continue to be a place to continue to be the place that we've been, but to really protect the diversity and the equity and the ability of folks to not be displaced.
To share it.
Yeah.
And share it responsibly. Let's go down a few things that we talk about with accomplishments. We'll just kind of bullet point through a few things here, if that's okay. Let's talk about, because you were on council. In fact, I remember, I think one of the first times I met you, we were talking about the electric buses were coming in, and you were working over at UM, and you guys got the electric buses first. I thought, this is really, I had a hard time wrapping my head around, electric buses, this is interesting. But it was part of one of the first things we saw about clean energy in this effort. And talk a little bit about looking back over the past several years of being able to move in that clean energy direction.
Yeah, and so electric buses are really near and dear to me because they are a clean energy. They're greening our transportation system. But the Humboldt City bus is the most magical thing, I think, in urban planning. The ability of the bus to it's a great equalizer. I used to, when I worked on campus, you'd have faculty riding the bus along with individuals who were experiencing homelessness, and you would have, along with students who were renters, and you had this great equalizer among people in the community riding the bus. And it's the only mode of transportation that gets better the more people who use it. You get more people on Reserve Street, and that gets worse and worse the more people you have on Reserve Street. The bus is the only thing that gets better because the more people that are on it, the more you can afford to add another bus. And you add another bus, and you get the frequency, and you get the convenience. And you have the air quality benefits of reducing emissions, reducing drive-alone emissions. And so every single person who rides the bus creates a system benefit for everyone else, for transit users, for drivers. And so the bus, I think, is underrated as a concept, first of all. But then the energy piece, it used to be, when I got to UM, we had a 1998 New Flyer 35-foot low-floor diesel bus that had a straight exhaust pipe, and it was like a coal smokestack. You'd see the noise and the emissions were problematic, and you could pack that bus to standing room only, but you still had localized air quality issues. You had particulate criteria pollutants, nitrous oxide and sulfur compounds and different things that are a product of burning diesel fuel. And you had the noise and the emissions that were really localized in a neighborhood that was part low income, that had a proximate elementary school, that had childcare at the university, and so you really don't want diesel emissions intermingled with a childcare facility. So the electric bus, it couples the bus and with removing the tailpipe emissions. Now there's issues with electric vehicles. Those are something that we can deal with in a way that is much more effective than what we can do with diesel emissions.
And a lot of what you've done too, and what you've seen happen too in the city is just all of these behind the scenes things. We've talked about before, changing lighting, changing the way, how many things are printed out, using smart devices. There's a lot going on there too.
We have in our strategic plan, we have a pillar called organizational excellence. And this is everything under the hood. My sister works as a costumer in the film industry, and she always says that in your typical contemporary movie or drama or whatever, that the costumes are right when nobody notices them. And that's kind of how I feel about local government, that things are right when nobody knows it's there. You only notice that the streets aren't plowed if the streets aren't plowed. And you only notice if the grass isn't cut in the parks, if the park is a mess, or if there's dog poop all over the place. So these are the sorts of things where if local government is functioning right, it is you increasingly don't notice that it's there. And so I think a lot of what we do through this organizational excellence is build trust with the community in a way where they know that we're there, but they know that they don't have to worry because the city's got it under control.
I think of the metering changes that have been going underway, especially under Mountain Water and things, of them coming out and installing different things that, the rest of the neighborhood may not even know. But boy, that homeowner, all of a sudden now something is making a difference.
Yeah.
The rates are more equitable. They're noticing efficiencies in the use of the resource. So it extends beyond the walls of City Hall too.
Yeah, and so it used to be with water we had a lot of flat rate customers. So you had and most people were overpaying, and it was also there was no incentive to conserve. You didn't pay for what you used, so you could just flood the lawn.
Just go for it.
Yeah, and so the meter is a step toward conservation, but also we're installing meters that are these smart meters. And so they have a radio connection to a receiver, and they'll report back if there's an anomaly. So maybe you're out of town and your washing machine hose burst and your basement is flooding, and we're not there yet. But down the road, we'll get to the point where you could receive a text message that, hey, your water usage has spiked. You might want to check on it.
Something's going on.
Yeah,
you didn't blow out the sprinklers this last fall.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the acquisition of the federal building. This is something that is still in the early phases of this, but I know even prior to the pandemic, at least in the early stages of it, we were always, we're going to get the federal building. I remember Martin Kidston and I would write stories, seemed like every 6 months. The building's coming, the building's coming. Well, now it's finally ours. And I think that has a lot of, that's a lot of that decade potential there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's a great example of I think local government functioning well. So we are out of space. City Hall was built half century ago, and it was built at a time when our population was less than half of what it is now. It was built at a time when we had less than half the city staff we have now, and we've just outgrown it. We've outgrown the building, and the building is beyond its useful life. So we looked at 4 alternatives. We looked at upgrading the building, which would be renovating it, replacing its major mechanical systems, and expanding it. We looked at demolishing the building and rebuilding on site. We looked at continuing to lease additional private office space throughout the downtown, which we currently do. And we looked at acquiring the federal building. And of those choices, acquiring the federal building was the cheapest choice. It was the most sustainable choice. It was the choice that allowed us to preserve this historic building in our downtown. And it was the choice that allowed us to consolidate city and county, which again is a public service, by getting everyone into the same building and providing a level of service to the public. So it really was win-win. And it was the best option. So it was so great that we were able to pull that together. We had tremendous help from Senator Tester, and never would have been able to get there without the senator's help navigating the federal process. There's a process called the Good Neighbor Program through the General Services Administration, where they will give a surplus federal building to a city or to a local government, to a town or city or county government, at no cost, provided that you maintain the building in its historic state and take good care of it. There's a lot of strings attached to that. There's a lot of documentation, and I don't like the term red tape because I think there's purposes for
record keeping.
There's a lot of record keeping, and just demonstrating that you're a good actor doing what you say you're going to do, being accountable. But in some cases with these federal processes, definitely some red tape too. But just a lot to do to get the building into municipal ownership.
It's quite a turnaround when you think about when the Forest Service moved out, especially. There was a lot of concern downtown because that was a lot of employees that were no longer in the core. So to see that happen is definitely turning something that that could have gone in the other direction
Yeah.
into a positive. What's sort of next on that too? We haven't talked about that for a few months. What's kind of, in a nutshell, what's the next step in terms of that federal
Yeah,
facility?
so we've been working throughout the year with an architect. We've been doing assessments of different departments, what their space needs are, what their security and access needs are. So if you look at courts, courts have a different security profile than the building permit desk. And so what we really want to do is work with the county to consolidate courts. So ideally, we get municipal court and district court in the courthouse together. And that's a good public service. We get a lot of people who come to City Hall looking for district court. And so just consolidating courts where there's ready access to bailiffs, to security, and just, city and county attorneys are proximate. So we've looked at things like that, what functions are grouped together, and then what things really don't have a lot of public access needs. So, the city IT department is this backbone that supports the whole organization, but the public doesn't need to walk into IT and receive a service over the counter. So just a lot of analysis of those different groupings. Work has changed also. We have some permanent remote workers. We anticipate that will continue in some regard. We also have programs that I think are going to change dramatically. I think it's fair to say that you probably don't need to come downtown to get a license plate in the future. That's something that I think technology, I hope, will kind of change our processes and just make for more convenient public services than we have right now.
So probably in 25, will we start seeing some of that probably put together, hopefully in a schematic that we can kind of come back to and say this is kind of a roadmap?
Yeah. So over the coming year, I think that'll really be pulled together, and then we have some remediation work. So we've got some asbestos, lead paint. We also have some upgrades that are really essential. Some IT upgrades, some electrical upgrades, some lead pipes. So we'll take care of those building essentials. And then we'll figure out sort of the phasing of moving folks into that building.
Let's talk about a couple of things that are sort of a combination, just alluding to a lot of people don't realize that over the past, year, but past several years, really, the city has been moving in areas of better union agreements and working things out. We haven't heard some of the turmoil of past decades, perhaps. But then at the same time, too, we had major transitions in a couple of key positions with both Missoula Police and also the fire department transitions, people retiring, leaving, going to different things. Talk a little bit about sort of the internal aspect of that and how that's been felt pretty good to see that happen.
Yeah, so I mean, there's several things. So our employees at the city are, they're really they are the city's greatest asset. They are what they are who runs the organization, who provides public service. We need to take care of them. We need to retain them. We need to ensure that the job is meaningful and fulfilling. And I think that we've been able to do that in a couple of really key ways. So we did a non-union pay study. We've actually got a pretty complicated array of unions and non-union employees. We've got 14 bargaining units. We have several hundred non-union employees. And what we found over the years is that we had pay disparities in our non-union employees. Oftentimes these were lower paid positions. Oftentimes they were more so female held positions. And that pay study was a real equity issue. So it was a pay equity issue. It was a retention issue. It was a fairness issue. We were able to equalize and sort of bring everyone up to the market rate. In some cases, we had people who were above market rate, and they that was nice for them during that period of time. But we're going to over time get them down to what a market rate is. And so it really equalized those non-union positions from a fairness standpoint. That was implemented over the last year to 2 years. And then this year, all of our bargaining units were up. They're all on a 4-year contract. So we spent a lot of time, and this is something that I'm really proud of and pleased about, is that we spent a lot of time working with those bargaining units to really come to a point where they were all paid fairly, and I'll give you one example. So our police department is is remarkably underpaid. We didn't, we had done a market study some years ago. We were a leader. Recruitment and retention of police officers has been challenging around the country.
It's really hard, yeah.
And it's unfortunately that's not a problem we've had in Missoula, but that's something that we got caught flat-footed because police departments around the country and around the state were raising wages to retain officers, and suddenly we were behind. And so we were able to get a really good market adjustment for our police officers, for incredibly challenging, important work, but in order to retain quality trained officers. And that was again, a collectively bargained process with the Missoula Police Officers Association. They were great bargaining partners, and had a lot of shared objectives. And we were able to get to a point of a one-time wage increase of around 10%, which is a pretty significant increase, along with cost of living increases in future years. And that, I think, will go a long way toward that recruitment and retention piece. And someone might say, well, that's a big increase. And I point back to there is a brewing public safety crisis in this country in terms of the ability to recruit and, and retain and staff a police force. The city of Los Angeles is down 8,000 officers from where they ought to be, and we've got 100 and we've got 100.
And some of that really, I think, is partly generational.
Mm-hmm.
I can think of a lot of the officers that I knew that maybe they started their career in the 80s or even 90s, and now they're getting to the point they want to either retire or move on to something else. And then you had a lot of those veterans that came back from the Middle East in the early 2000s. Well, even those people have been now on 20 some years,
mm-hmm.
and they're also looking to change or do something different sometimes. So you kind of wonder where our next officers are coming from in the next few years.
And policing is challenging, and there are systemic problems with policing around the country. I maintain that we have a top-notch police department, and that we can be a leader, we can learn from others, we can be a leader, and we can innovate around public safety. And so I think it's taking care of the department. It's making sure that they're well trained, that they have the resources that they need, that they receive the support and equipment and again the training that they need. And it's also providing alternative response mechanisms like our mobile support team,
crisis unit,
mm-hmm,
and those things.
And these things to me are all about creating this integrated approach to public safety. And it's critical. I mean, so you go back to that wage increase, and that is critical for the long-term safety and security and stability of our community.
And better to catch up now than trying to do it in 5 years when the gap's even wider. Exactly.
So we don't have a recruitment problem right now with mm-hmm. police, but we're not far away from it, and so we want to make sure that we stay ahead of that. So our administrative captain, who is responsible for hiring, is really innovating on how he's going about trying to cast a wider net from a recruitment standpoint, and it all goes together.
This is Wednesdays with the Mayor. We're sitting down with Mayor Jordan Hess here at the end of a very productive, very challenging, busy year. Like I said earlier, I always think of you with enthusiasm. Not a lot of mayors have that kind of enthusiasm. If you're watching live and you have a question you'd like to call in for the mayor, 546-7692, 406-546-7692 if you're watching live right now. And I want to give a special thanks to our Scott and everybody that's been involved with MCAT for helping us with these programs, which we started back in spring of 22, as I recall. So we've done quite a few shows over the years, and we appreciate all their help, and, of course, Missoula Public Library for staffing here. One of the things I thought was interesting, when Mayor Engen passed away last year, one of the first interviews I did about that was talking with County Commissioner Dave Strohmeyer. And having watched a not always, a perfect relationship between the city and the county, there's always a certain amount of competition for resources and different things, depending on personalities. But I asked Dave at the time, I said, you guys have made some real strides in recent years to be more cooperative. And I can remember Commissioner Strohmeyer saying how he really hoped and was optimistic about that continuing. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that relationship and how important it is today, especially in times of pandemics and limited resources and homelessness and all of these joint issues that are going on.
It couldn't be more critical. I think it is absolutely critical that we have a good partner in Missoula County. That is not the case around Montana's 56 counties. We're the exception. That city and county get along. Most cities don't get along with their host counties, and that's really a shame. And I don't know why that is. I mean, I think for us, it's been a really deliberate process of sharing information, sharing resources, partnering on projects, being collaborative. I count the county commissioners among my closest friends. I mean, they're great people, and it's a pleasure to work with them. And I think but it takes more than that. You have to have collaboration at staff levels, and you see that whether it's our joint city-county planning board or whether it's our joint effort to develop the federal building as a unified entity, or as two entities working together. You see that at every layer, and I think that's really positive. I think with the Sheriff Peterson and Chief Collier work really well together, and that's a new thing. And there's collaboration throughout the organizations, and that's I think that's something that's really special in our community that people might not realize. That I know a lot of major city county governments in the state really a lot of
and not just in Montana.
Yeah,
let me
yeah.
tell you, but my experience that is frequently where local government, some of the biggest challenges local government have
Yeah.
are when you have municipal and a county government, and they don't always, they don't have to agree every time, but at least be somewhat willing to work together.
Mm-hmm.
So and I think particular about the work recently on the property tax
Mm-hmm.
issue. How important has it been to have somebody like Josh Lotnick right there with you as you guys try to make this case in Helena and ask for changes and reforms and action at the legislative level?
It's been just critical, and I think you see that collaboration in other ways. So the League of Cities and Towns, there's 126 cities and towns. They're all members, and so just to have 100% participation in an organization like that, I think is a testament of the importance of working together. Same with MACO, the Montana Association of Counties. Having Beaverhead County and Missoula County agree and take the same approach on property taxes, that really tells you something. When you have urban and rural and conservative and progressive counties coming together and taking the same approach with the state, that gives you an indication that maybe they're onto something.
Yeah, maybe there is a way to work together on things and those things. I want to talk about something that certainly has been repeated headlines, shall we say, and that's the homeless issue. It certainly didn't start last year, and it seems like ever since I've been in Missoula, there have been even as far back as when we were trying to get the new Poverello Center built. I mean, it's been ongoing, but it certainly has kind of moved to a different level over the past, say, 18, 24 months. How do you feel about where we are with those things, and what are some of the steps that you can look back on and say, we tried our best, or we're trying our best with?
Yeah. So I think we have, as a community, we've tried a lot of things. Some things have worked pretty well. Some things have required retooling. I think the place to start is that it was low 20s this morning. It's bitter cold Hellgate winds. We've had this beautiful fall, and it's the first really cold day, and you and I get to go home after this. And that's something that we can never take for granted, that there's a segment of our community that doesn't have that luxury, or that basic, it's not a luxury, that basic comfort and safety mechanism that we rely on. And so I've tried to have that be a guiding principle of, we have people in our community who need help, who we need to take care of. And there's good ways to do that, and there's problematic ways to do that. But that is sort of the guiding principle, I think. And so last year we opened an authorized campsite. It was a failure. It was problematic. It was an area of crime. There were safety issues. It didn't provide outcomes in terms of a pathway out of homelessness. It was difficult to staff, and it wasn't really the right approach.
In fairness, though, I will point out that it was a different approach to the same concept we tried with the temporary shelters that came up after the or during the pandemic,
Exactly.
right? So it was a different approach, just didn't quite work in the same fashion.
Yeah. And so we've retooled. We in June I declared a homelessness state of emergency, and directed staff to really work to reopen the Johnson Street shelter. The Johnson Street temporary shelter is just that. It is a congregate shelter. It is on a day like today, or more realistically, a day where it's below zero, that shelter is really about saving lives, and that is that sounds like a low bar for success, but that is the primary goal, is making sure that we don't have people die of exposure to the elements, and it's been successful. Over the past couple of years, we've had I'm aware of one individual who has died of exposure. That used to be a regular annual a couple times a year occurrence before we had the emergency winter shelter. So one of the things we do in local government is we do something and then we iterate and get better at it. So the first year that we had an emergency shelter, there was a group of us, myself and Mayor Engen and a couple others, gathered together in a conference room trying to figure out, we had a cold snap coming, it was going to be way below zero. How do we open an emergency shelter this weekend? and we worked with Mountain Line and got them, they kept the Mountain Line transfer center open for the weekend, and volunteers brought food, and it was this whole effort. It wasn't tenable or sustainable as a long-term effort. So the next year we got better. We opened a more robust emergency winter shelter, and the next year we got better. This year, I think with the Johnson Street shelter being open for 1 year, we're doing the best we've ever done. We've got an outdoor space that is far more appropriate, that is far more conducive to having folks stay on site. We have significantly fewer concerns and complaints from the neighborhood. We have, in general, the service is operating a lot better than it has in the past. And so that, I just say that as an example of, over a couple of years, you do something, you learn from it, you improve it, and you do it again, and you do it better, or you modify it and throw it out and try something different.
It's my favorite quote from J.K. Simmons is, from the State Farm commercials, we know a few things because we've seen a few things.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And that's where you get, right. You can't just go in, and we're not alone with that. I mean, cities are trying all kinds of different combinations and different things, and have been for years, but more so as this issue has grown.
Yeah. And, I think the important context here is that the Reagan years, there was a wholesale change in how mental health was handled at the federal level. In 2017, the legislature cut mental health case management, and we saw people slowly go off their meds and slowly slip into homelessness. And we're the fruits of those seeds that were sown in the 2017 legislature are bearing fruit now, and we have people in homelessness because of the actions of the legislature.
What kind of reassurances, just to play devil's advocate for a minute, if I'm somebody that's living, I don't want to say Johnson Street, but in an area that might be considered, or maybe it's been impacted, you live near the parks, and we're trying to deal with the aftermath of this court ruling, what kind of reassurances can you offer to Missoula residents, though, who are worried, we're going to become another Portland, or we're going to become another Seattle? What can you tell them? What kind of hope can you give us for meeting those challenges ahead?
Well, I think it's simple. To me, it's not simple. It's a complicated, intractable problem. But I think the assurances are, to me, or the structure we need to take is relatively simple, which is that you have services that are evidence-based that help people, get a hand up, hopefully out of homelessness, or certainly into stable housing, a stable housing where they have the opportunity to
change that houselessness sort of equation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is that you have to have some accountability for problematic behavior. And that's something that I think that's what the assurance to the community is that we have very few, but a couple dozen people in our community who create nearly all of the problems in terms of aggressive panhandling, or in terms of encampments that create risks to health and safety. And so we need to have accountability mechanisms for those, and we need to have a very compassionate approach to getting people into services. And those two things together, neither one of them work alone, but you've got to have those working together. And so we've got an ordinance that will be coming to the new council that brings our ordinance into compliance with the Ninth Circuit rulings and provides some enforcement mechanisms really for those problematic cases. And we've got shelter beds available, and we've got services available, and we really steer and direct and encourage people into those services.
One thing people do not realize, and I have seen it many times, is how the folks who are in that homelessness, houselessness situation, there's a certain core group of people that will police their own,
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating to see. They will sort of say, somebody comes new into that community and they go, no, this is the way we roll. This is the way it is. And I saw that in Seattle. You core group of people would get together, and still one of the most successful transitional housing things I've ever seen started with a camp down by the old Kingdom years ago. And the mayor went down and said, you can't be down here. Well, what do? They opened a bus garage. Oh, we'll be over here for a while. By the course of about a year and a half, they had taken over an old hotel and turned it into a transitional housing that 30 years later is still a success story. So, yeah, there's options there. I want to touch on this, too. I've got a list here. This is, we talk about new facilities, too. Listen to this list. Trinity Apartments, affordable, full with applications, 80% moved in, up to 70% of the AMI. Blue Heron Place, 30 units of supportive housing for chronically homeless and disabled, part of Trinity. Velago, the affordable 50 households moved in, 100 applications in the pipeline, 1,000 applying for 200 apartments, up to 60% AMI. And affordable housing this year is opened at a rate never seen in Missoula, according to the Missoula Housing Authority. That must feel really good to be leaving and know there's that kind of momentum out there.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's the result of deliberate action. I was looking at my campaign literature, my postcard that I sent out in 2013, and there were three things. There was transportation, public ownership of our water system, and affordable housing. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I was looking back, and I bumped into an article in the Missoulian that Ginny Merriam, our communications director, had written when she was at the Missoulian, and it was about John Engen's election in 2005, and he was talking about housing, and he was talking about open space, and he was talking about housing, and the reason we have this much housing, this level of housing opening this year, is because there's been a deliberate effort for a long time, and I think that's going to continue. Through the code reform work, through the workforce housing policy at the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, through all of our work deliberately with the development community in order to enable the development of housing Missoulians can afford. We're going to see that continue. But those have been in the works for years.
And Scott Street, too. I didn't even add that on the list. The thing that's fascinating to me, too, is you've seen, let's just say, rents go up. And sure, we're adding a lot of multifamily units over the last 5-6 years, but with the prices that a lot of those are hitting the market, you're still hitting above where people are. So we're building a third level, if you will, that's going to be super important in the next few years.
So there's we need housing at all price points. If we don't have $800,000 houses, then people buy $300,000 houses and tear them down and build something bigger. And if we don't have, and so the upper end of the market takes care of itself, and I'm not worried about that end of the market. That they'll be fine. The low end of the market, we have some of these tools with the income qualified units, and so we have the Villagio, like you mentioned, is up to 60% of area median income. So there's a formula for that, and there's and if you're earning up to 60% of the area median income, then you can qualify. So these are income qualified units. So the Blue Heron units, for folks that are experiencing chronic homelessness with really no income to speak of. And that's a combination of federal vouchers and tax credits, and there's a whole complicated structure and financing stacks that make those work. And then there's this wide swath that is often referred to as the missing middle. So it's kind of the donut hole of who falls through the cracks, where they can't afford market rate, they can't afford, or they make too much to be income qualified, and that's where the opportunity is really with some of our work around code reform. making it more affordable to build housing that folks can access. And there's a lot of things that drive that, and nearly all of them are outside of our control. So there's the labor market, which is largely outside of our control. I've heard it as the 5 L's. So there's labor, lumber, lots,
Land.
That's lots. Lots are land.
Yeah,
And,
I know the one you mean.
but,
Yeah, there's these factors that they're immovable. You've got to take them into account.
Yeah, and the lending.
Lending.
Lending is outside of our control. Labor is outside of our control. Lumber or materials are outside of our control. It's the regulatory piece. Land and lots. So land is the physical space, and lots are the entitled places where you can build. Really, lots. That's what we control. And so if we can streamline our regulations in a way that still promote quality, that still allow us, or that still maintain our community's standards of quality, but really do strip out some of the duplicative regulations. That's one of the ways that we can incent the building of housing for that missing middle.
I think that's just my personal opinion. I just think that's a huge piece, because if you drive around, and I have, chasing stories all over the city, into different neighborhoods, into different places, there's still another whole layer of folks out there where you've got it could be an older mobile home, it could be an older house that was built in the teens or 20s. There's a lot of places that over the next 5 to 10 years are going to really be either not habitable, or health concerns, or safety concerns, things that you start to see. There's a piece there that's going to come off the market, and being able to have that kind of reform. So somebody, whether it's Missoula Housing Authority, Homeward, whoever, can come in and say, hey, from a regulation standpoint, or a builder, we can come in and make something happen. That's where the code reform comes in, right?
Yeah. And I think that also that preservation, those units that you refer to, oftentimes we talk about those as naturally occurring affordable housing, and that's it might be substandard, it might be run down, it might just be that someone hasn't raised the rent but hasn't really taken care of the place, and that's an important piece of our housing stock. Now, what's really great is if we can transition that into something that is still affordable. So we've had a couple of successes with resident-owned communities where mobile home park residents have actually been able to purchase their lot or their mobile home park and operate them as a co-op. And we've also had we've had the state's first co-op model, where residents were able to come together and actually buy the apartment building with help from our Affordable Housing Trust Fund and with help from NeighborWorks Montana, but they were able to do that, and so they're able to preserve this affordable housing, but then also improve it and take care of it and gain equity in it, and not lose that asset to the community, but also really have that personal benefit.
Yeah.
So to the extent that we can leverage our Affordable Housing Trust Fund to do things like that, that is the line of work that we need to be in to preserve these places where folks in our community
Because
live.
it's a huge piece. I mean, I've seen units, and whether it's stick built or mobile homes or whatever, I'll see things that I can remember doing stories, just generally in the Northwest 30 years ago, and people saying, oh, this is at the end of its life, and here they are, still online. A mobile home that was built in 1952 is still being used. So yeah, quality of life and moving those along is pretty exciting. Couple other things we'll hit here. Let's do a lightning round, shall we, Mayor? Let's talk about and the setup with this is really the amount of grants. I mean, this is an astonishing number, approximately leveraging of $100 million in federal and state grants. The list of this is pretty amazing. Let's just go through a couple of these. We've got the Downtown Sam and the Build Grant. Let's kind of talk about those together. They're two different places.
Yeah, so Downtown Sam, Downtown Safety, Access, and Mobility, that is rebuilding. That's a $25 million federal grant, a RAISE grant, and that is rebuilding Higgins, Front, and Main, and providing an ADA accessible route from the bridge, the Bear Tracks Bridge, down into Caris Park, and widening our Northside River parks, our trail, to an 18-foot trail. And so it really provides for sustainable transportation in our downtown. But more importantly, I think it allows us to replace this infrastructure that in some cases is well over 100 years old. Higgins Avenue still has streetcar tracks underneath it, and there are basements underneath sidewalks on Higgins.
Yeah.
It is 19th century infrastructure, and it is high time
It's
to replace
historic
that.
and cool, but it can come back to bite you.
Yeah, and
exactly.
you can keep the historic cool part, and actually deal with drainage and deal with stormwater downtown is a great example where up until recently there were outfalls that would just go
Straight discharge
into the river.
Yeah.
So oil and cigarette butts and grit from the road, all of that would go straight into the river. And we've made these upgrades to the outfall system, but the collection system is this old infrastructure. So great opportunity to update that infrastructure. The build grant was $13 million, and that was building new streets and roads and utility infrastructure in the Setupkin area to the west of Reserve Street. And that will enable the development of over 10,000 residential units. And really allows us to build in kind of that compact, traditional neighborhood design format on the way out. Between
one thing people don't realize with Setupkin, and you look at that Mullen areas, we're kind of doing exactly the opposite. I'll pick on Bozeman for a minute. Do the exact opposite of what Bozeman did not really have the opportunity. Bozeman just grew it like in tree rings, right? It was like whatever. They did some planning, but for us to be able to proactively go in way ahead of time. And use those kinds of newer concepts, that's a pretty big advantage.
Yeah, it really is. And Helena too, and to their credit, they have these massive valleys that are and we probably would have done it too if we'd had the space decades ago. We probably would have done it too. We are pretty constrained, and but we do have the space at Frenchtown and Huson, and I think what we don't want to see is 1 acre lots from here to Huson. I mean that is. From a climate standpoint, from a water quality standpoint, from a transportation safety standpoint.
Well, future use transport.
Future use,
most of the studies will tell you that people, they don't. The younger generation doesn't buy cars like everybody else. They're not necessarily looking for that. They want that neighborhood shopping and walking space and parks and those kinds of things.
And then preserving habitat, preserving ag land, all of that. I mean that compact development that'll enable us to develop in a way that's really responsible moving forward. So that build grant was that bought down that $13 million investment, coupled with the local money through the utilities, that bought down the cost of new housing, and that's something that's really important right now.
Also, the Northside Riverbank, we talked a little bit about the EPA aspect of that, and of course cleaning up the river. That also is another case of using those grants, right?
So we got a economic development agency grant for some improvements at Caris Park and to the river, hardened access down into Brennan's Wave to deal with erosion and to deal with the immense popularity of that. And then you couple that with with our open space money that we'll be using to create these hardened river access points along the Clark Fork River. And you'll have the ability in some cases to have ADA accessible.
I'm so excited about that because it'll spread out use of the river, which is good, but it'll also make it safer. I mean, I worry. I've been out with the firefighters and watched them try to do river rescues and training and some of these things, and that downstream from Caris, that's a dangerous stretch of river. So to be able to have those access points is huge.
And those front country, compressing or concentrating impacts in the front country is important. If we really make quality access at certain places at the river and discourage access at other places, that means that we will have more stable stream banks in all those other places. And same goes for trailheads. If we really have places where we encourage access and encourage really responsible recreation, that will preserve those places that are a little more special. That you maybe when you get out backpacking on the weekend, you have the place to yourself. And so it's about really being a good steward of those places.
We talked earlier about buses. I don't want to get you going too hard on buses again. You love buses, and so do I. But I mean, cooperative with Mountain Line to be able to see not just the electric transition, but to go to 7-day-a-week service and be able to have that going on, the fare-free situation. I mean, that's a remarkable thing that benefits the city for a lot of the reasons we've talked about too.
Well, and I've been proud to be a mayor that rides the bus. I think that that's something that is probably not super common. And I think that that's something that is, like I said, I do believe in the bus as something that's important in our community. And you can turn a 2-car household into a 1-car household, or a 3-car household into a 2-car household. save a lot of money. Cost of owning a car is pushing $10,000 a year, according to AAA. So by providing those opportunities, you can really just open up doors for people to have to access the community.
I thought that Corey Aldridge and his team did such an amazing job during the pandemic too. I mean, what a way to be able to still provide transit and provide that key link that really, I don't think people realize what that did for us during, especially in 2020.
Yeah.
I mean, it was huge having that service there and being able to operate regardless.
Absolutely.
And still follow guidelines.
Yeah.
Was huge.
And it was, I was working at the university at the time in transit, and it was kind of a harrowing and challenging time to be providing a public service like that. And the disinfecting protocols and all the things that we were doing to ensure that that transit riders were safe. It really was an incredible effort, of transit providers. Mountain Line, so they got a $40 million grant, and that's on top of a variety of other grants that they've received recently. I think they've got 12 buses on order right now, 12 electric buses. So they'll be nearly
and the new facility.
And the new facility, that's the $40 million grant. And so they've expanded over the years. They've added service, they've added routes, they've added buses, they've added the evening and weekend service and the frequency of service. And what they haven't done is expanded their facility. And so if they could park buses on top of buses, I think they would be right now. But this $40 million will be for them to build a new facility that will really enable them to continue to grow. And
helps that north side neighborhood again. No more diesel buses coming and going in the shop and all that too. One final thing too is the state ARPA grants that we got for utility infrastructure, and as you mentioned earlier, bringing us full circle, the water main leaks and that type of stuff is huge to be able to pull those.
Our team has been pulling in so much money through ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, and that is through the state. Those are competitive grants. So we apply for those, and those are for things like, replacing a lift station in the sewer system, or sewer main upgrades or water main replacements. Just really critical nuts and bolts kind of infrastructure. Again, the stuff that if the government's functioning well, you don't even know it's there. You really don't know there's the sewer system's there until you.
But boy, when it breaks, when it breaks, let me tell you.
Yeah,
I've covered a few of those over the years.
And one other thing, I am really passionate about our wastewater system in Missoula, and I think it's sort of a microcosm of innovation at the local government level, where you have this system of hundreds of miles, 327 miles, I think, of sewer mains, collecting, everything that's collecting everything, and then it arrives at this plant, and there is this process that is pretty incredible, where there's a primary clarifier, it's called.
Clarifiers, right?
And then there's these biological processes. So you have different microbes that are introduced at different stages in the process to remove phosphorus or to remove nitrogen, and then you've got this UV sterilization process, and that's sort of what's required. We already exceed our permit standards. We run a good quality operation there. We directly discharge about 7 to 8 million gallons a day into the Clark Fork River of treated effluent. But that's kind of where the innovation starts. So we, instead of directly discharging that, we do a portion of it, but we also irrigate poplar tree plantation or forest, and those poplar trees uptake these nutrients that remain in the treated effluent, and prevent that from going into the river. So that's over 1 million gallons a day. That is nutrient rich and good for growing poplar trees. It's also good for growing algae, which is not what you want in the river. And so it's a water quality benefit. We then also compost the solids. Through our municipal-owned compost facility, we can compost products from the poplar plantation. We can compost products that the public bring in. We also then capture methane off the plant, and we used to flare that off. Now we generate. We have a generator on the site, so we generate heat for the plant and electricity for the plant. And then we also have the second largest solar array in Montana, the largest one in western Montana, that is on that site. And we get a major portion of the power needs from the site there on site. And so that's sort of just the attitude at the wastewater treatment plant, and again, wastewater is not particularly when you just say when you mention that to someone, that's not something
People
that,
don't realize.
that
They see it go down.
captivates.
As far as they're concerned, their interest ends at the drain.
Yeah, yeah,
But the whole system is just. I mean, and I've seen a few of these when they don't work.
Yeah.
And the bugs don't work, and oh my gosh, so it's amazing what they're. It's
Yeah.
science.
Yeah.
It's science.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, I was at heard a presentation at the Montana League of Cities and Towns a couple of weeks ago about Bozeman did a pilot project where they were introducing wastewater from their breweries at a certain place in the process in order to provide additional sugars and feedstock for the bacteria, and they were taking what was more of a liability if it goes in at the beginning, and they were putting it in somewhere else and creating, further reducing their nutrient load. And so that's the attitude that that plant takes, is that they are innovating all the time. And I think that's the thing that's really exciting about the city, is that staff are innovating and they're trying to do better. They're trying to find better solutions. They're trying to provide better public services. And that, in a nutshell, is what is so great about the city as an organization.
It's a fun experience to have front row seat for that.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you as we wrap up, what's next for Jordan Hess? Do you think? I mean, I can see you having an electric bus that somehow uses biochemical process to go back and forth to the wastewater plant for tours. I don't know what you're going to do, but I can tell you're going to be enthusiastic about whatever it is. Have you thought about that next step?
Well, I've come to appreciate the more, I guess, humanitarian aspects of the job, where I think that we've just got to take care of ourselves. We've got to take care of our community, and Missoula has always been a community that takes care of people and place, and I think that's the thing that's the thing that'll stick with me. So I'll be unemployed in about 4 weeks, and I don't really know what's next. But I'm fortunate to be able to take a little bit of time to figure it out, and I'll be around. I'll be in the community, and I'll be looking for cool opportunities.
I'm sure you will. Well, Jordan, I want to thank you for this evening and for the evenings we've had to talk about various city things. It's been great. And just on behalf of the community, to be able to thank you too for your service, for jumping in at an emotionally raw time at City Hall with John's passing, to be able to jump in there and just hit the ground running with both feet and do all of these things we've talked about. It's a pretty nice list.
I've had a lot of help. It's been a lot of fun, and it's been just a real pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we appreciate it and wish you the best with making electric buses or whatever you end up doing. Right? Okay. So,
thank you, Dennis. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mayor Jordan Hess, our final Wednesdays with the Mayor. We want to thank all of you for watching and for listening and providing your input and showing up here at the Missoula Public Library. Again, thanks to our MCAT staff for hosting us with these programs for the past many months. And thanks to Missoula Public Library for being such a gracious host and for having the enclosed parking on a windy night like tonight. I always appreciate that. It's like, that was great design right there. So we appreciate it very much. Thanks for joining us again for Wednesdays with the Mayor.